The sun was just beginning to peek through the thick curtains of the house on Devan Street when the sirens of ambulances broke the morning silence of the respectable Norwalk neighborhood. Neighbors, accustomed to the measured rhythm of life, peered out of their windows with curiosity, watching the commotion outside house number 237. This neighborhood was not a place where dramatic events took place. It was home to middle-class working families, civil servants, teachers, and managers of small companies. People who went to work every morning and returned home in the evening to their families and candlelit dinners. Detective Zana Imara parked her beat-up sedan next to a shiny patrol car and slowly made her way to the front door. At 42, she had seen enough death to know the seriousness of the situation with a single glance at her colleagues' faces. Patrol Officer Davis, a young guy with a faint mustache, shifted nervously from foot to foot on the porch. His usual self-confidence had evaporated. "What do we have here, Davis?" Zana asked, pulling a worn notebook out of her bag, which had served her faithfully for over 10 years. "Jabari Kiambu, 34 years old, district attorney. His wife found him dead in the kitchen around 7 this morning. Preliminary medical examiner says poisoning, but the exact cause of death won't be determined until the autopsy." Davis swallowed and added quietly, "Detective, this guy worked with us on a lot of cases. He was a good prosecutor, honest." Zana nodded, noting the passage of time in the young officer's speech. Death always made people philosophical. "Where's his wife?" "In the living room with a social worker. She's in a bad way, but she says she's ready to talk. Her name is Kamara Abeni, married name Kiambu." Zana walked into the house, looking around carefully. The interior spoke of wealth, but without excess. Quality dark wood furniture, neat bookshelves with legal literature and classics, family photos in expensive but not pretentious frames. The walls were painted in warm beige tones, and a feminine touch was evident everywhere. Soft cushions on the sofa, fresh flowers in vases, carefully selected accessories. A typical home of a middle-class representative who earns an honest living and can afford a comfortable life without luxury, but also without hardship. The kitchen had a completely different atmosphere. Near the dining table, the figure of a man lying face down was outlined in chalk. Next to it stood a half-empty cup of coffee in a beautiful ceramic mug and scattered documents. Apparently, the victim had been reading something over breakfast. The coffee maker, an expensive Italian model, was still warm, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee still lingered in the air, mingling with the less pleasant aromas that always accompany sudden death. Zana carefully examined the scene, noting every detail. The man was dressed in casual clothes, cotton pants and a polo shirt, but even in this informal setting, he looked well-groomed. The watch on his wrist was high quality, but unremarkable, a mid-range Swiss brand. His wedding ring was white gold with no additional decoration. A pair of thin-framed reading glasses lay next to the body. "Where exactly did you find the body?" the detective asked the forensic technician who was present. "Right here near the table. Judging by the position, the man fell while sitting at breakfast. No signs of a struggle or forced entry. Preliminary examination indicates poisoning, dilated pupils, characteristic skin color. Coffee samples have already been taken for analysis." Zana nodded and headed for the living room, where a slender woman with beautiful, expressive features was sitting on the sofa. Kamara Abeni possessed a natural elegance that did not depend on clothing or makeup. Even in her moment of grief, with her eyes red from crying and her hands trembling, she looked like a woman who was used to taking care of herself. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back into a low bun, and her simple black dress fit perfectly. Next to her stood a social worker, an elderly woman with a kind face, who was quietly saying something to try to calm the widow. "Mrs. Kiambu, I'm Detective Zana Imara. I'm very sorry for your loss. I understand how difficult this must be for you, but I need to ask you a few questions." Kamara looked up, and Zana saw genuine pain in her eyes. Whatever the truth was about Jabari's death, his wife's grief seemed completely genuine. "Of course, Detective. I'll do whatever I can to help. I just can't believe Jabari is gone. Just yesterday, we were planning our vacation, and now—" The woman's voice broke. "Tell me about last night. How was your husband feeling? Did he act unusual in any way?" Kamara took the glass of water offered by the social worker and took a small sip, gathering her thoughts. He came home around 7 in the evening as usual. Maybe a little later. The traffic was terrible. We had dinner. I made his favorite dish, roast chicken with rice and vegetables. Then we watched the news and discussed our plans for the weekend. And how did he look? How was his mood? How did he feel? Jabari seemed... Kamara paused, searching for the right words. I don't know, maybe a little worried, but not sick. He said he had a lot going on at work, some important case he was working on. He'd been preoccupied with work a lot lately. Did he give you any details about the case? No, Jabari didn't like to discuss work at home. He said he wanted to leave work at the office so that family time could really be family time. That was one of his principles. Kamara smiled faintly at the memory. He was a very principled man in many ways. And in the morning? Did you have breakfast together? No, I got up earlier, around 6 in the morning. I have a habit of doing yoga in the morning. I go to a studio on Main Street, where they have early classes for working people. When I left, Jabari was still asleep. He was always a night owl, and I'm a morning person. And when did you get back? Around 7 in the morning. The class lasts an hour, plus the commute there and back. When I walked into the house, I immediately sensed that something was wrong. Usually by that time, Jabari was already sitting in the kitchen with his coffee and newspapers, but it was quiet. I went into the kitchen and found him. Kamara's voice trembled again, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Zana wrote down every word, watching the woman's reaction. So far, her behavior seemed natural. Shock, grief, attempts to help the investigation. But experience had taught the detective not to trust first impressions. Mrs. Kiambu, you said your husband had been troubled lately. When did this start? Kamara paused, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. 3 or 4 months ago, maybe. Jabari got a promotion. He was appointed lead prosecutor for special cases. It was a big responsibility, and he took it very seriously. His salary increased significantly, but so did his workload. How much did his salary increase? Almost double. Jabari was so happy. He had worked hard for this promotion and deserved it. We even started planning a big vacation in Europe, which we had dreamed of since we got married. Zana looked up from her notebook. A doubling of a civil servant's salary seemed like an unusually large jump, even for a significant raise. What changed in his work schedule? He started staying late at the office more often, sometimes working on weekends. There were meetings in the evening or early in the morning. Jabari said that important matters couldn't be put off. I understood and supported him. A career as a prosecutor requires a lot of sacrifice. Do you know who he was meeting with? Colleagues, judges? Jabari often worked with Judge Amari Kofi on several important cases. They consulted regularly, even meeting outside the court to discuss procedural issues. Jabari had great respect for Judge Kofi, saying he was a true professional with an impeccable reputation. Zana wrote down the judge's name carefully. In her practice, connections between victims and judges always required detailed investigation. There were too many opportunities for conflicts of interest. Did your husband have any enemies? People who might have wanted him dead? Kamara shook her head vigorously. Jabari was a fair prosecutor, but not a harsh one. He believed in the law, but also in the possibility of rehabilitation. Of course, the criminals he sent to prison didn't have any warm feelings toward him, but there were no specific threats. At least he never told me about any. Could there have been threats he didn't mention? Maybe, but that wasn't his style. Jabari and I were always honest with each other. If something was threatening his life, he would have told me. Zana noted this confidence to herself. Often, the people closest to us know the least about the secret aspects of our lives. Tell me, did you have any financial problems? Debts, loans, anything like that? On the contrary, our financial situation had improved significantly in recent months. In addition to a raise, Jabari was earning extra income consulting for someone on legal matters. We were even able to save up for a down payment on a new house in a better neighborhood. Who was he consulting for? To be honest, I didn't go into details. Jabari said it was a private company that needed advice on corporate law. The work didn't conflict with his duties as a prosecutor, and everything had been agreed with his superiors. Zana felt a red light go off in her mind. Ethical rules for prosecutors did severely limit opportunities for additional income, especially in the field of consulting. Mrs. Kiambu, Has your husband received any unusual calls lately? Maybe late at night or early in the morning? Kamara thought for a moment, and a look of surprise appeared on her face, as if she had just pieced together several details. Now that you mention it, yes, the phone has been ringing at odd hours over the last few weeks. Jabari always answered it himself and went to his office upstairs or out onto the terrace. He said it was work stuff that couldn't wait until morning. How often did this happen? Several times a week. Sometimes the calls were very short, just a minute or two. Sometimes they lasted half an hour or more. Did you hear what he was talking about? No, he always closed the door or moved away, but his voice was tense. Not like when he was talking to his colleagues, quieter, more cautious. I asked him about it several times, but Jabari said that some matters required confidentiality, even at home. At that moment, medical examiner Dr. Thompson entered the house, a heavy-set man with a gray beard who had worked with the Norwalk police for over 20 years. He approached Zana and said quietly, "Preliminary findings confirm poisoning. It appears to be cyanide or a similar fast-acting substance, but I'll know for sure after a complete analysis. Judging by the condition of the body and the contents of the stomach, death occurred between 6:30 and 7 o'clock this morning." Zana thanked the doctor and returned to Kamara, who had been listening intently to their quiet conversation. "A few more questions, Mrs. Kiambu. You said you found your husband around 7 in the morning. What time did he usually have breakfast?" Jabari was a very punctual man, a real stickler for routine. He always got up at 6:30, took a shower, shaved, and sat down to breakfast at 7. He had an unbreakable habit of reading the morning news with his first cup of coffee. And did he make his own coffee? Always. Jabari had very specific preferences in this regard. He bought the beans at a specialty store and ground them himself every morning. He said that only freshly ground coffee had the right taste and aroma. It was his little morning ritual. Zana wrote down these details as well. If the poisoning came from the coffee, then the circle of people who had access to it was very limited. Who else had access to your home? Relatives, friends, a housekeeper? Only my sister Aisha has a spare key, but she lives in Boston and hasn't been here for 2 months. A woman comes to clean once a week. Mrs. Johnson, she's been working for us for 3 years, but yesterday wasn't her day. She comes on Wednesdays. Other than that, only Jabari and I had access. Did anyone come to your house last night? No, we were home alone all evening. We didn't even order pizza. I made dinner myself. Zana closed her notebook and stood up. Thank you for your detailed answers, Mrs. Kiambu. I may have additional questions as the investigation progresses. I'll be in touch. Detective. Kamara also stood up, and Zana noticed that despite her grief, the woman carried herself with dignity. Do you really think someone deliberately poisoned Jabari? Couldn't it have been an accident? It's too early to draw any conclusions. We're looking at all possibilities, from accident to murder. As she left the house, Zana noticed a small group of neighbors who were still watching from a respectful distance. In neighborhoods like this, people usually know each other, and perhaps one of them had seen something important. She approached an elderly African-American woman standing at the fence of the neighboring house in a brightly colored robe. Good afternoon, Detective Imara. Did you know the Kiambu family well? Of course, we've been neighbors for 5 years. My name is Dolores Williams. Jabari and Kamara were very decent people, quiet and well-mannered. He always said hello when we met in the yard, and she sometimes brought over a cake when she was baking. I can't believe something so terrible has happened. Did you notice anything unusual last night or this morning? Dolores frowned thoughtfully. Last night was quiet as usual, but around midnight I woke up. I've been having trouble sleeping lately and heard a car door slam. The sound was distinct because everything sounds louder at night. I thought it was Jabari coming home from work, but he usually comes home much earlier. Did you notice anything this morning? Kamara left early before dawn, around 6 in the morning. I get up early. It's an old habit, and I saw her leaving the yard. Her car is quiet, but the headlights lit up my window. Then she came back a little over an hour later. I was just making coffee, and a few minutes later she started screaming. That's when I realized something serious had happened and called 911. This information matched Kamara's statement about her yoga class. Zana thanked her neighbor and went around a few more houses, but didn't learn anything else of significance. As she got into her car, The detective pondered the information she had received. The case promised to be difficult. On the one hand, the picture seemed clear. A man had been poisoned in his own home, to which only a limited number of people had access. On the other hand, too many details did not fit into a logical sequence. On the other hand, too many details did not fit into a clear picture. The sudden doubling of the successful prosecutor's income, mysterious consulting services, strange phone calls at unusual times, close working relationship with an influential judge. Zana started the engine and headed for the district attorney's office. She urgently needed to talk to Jabari's colleagues and find out the truth about his recent promotion, additional earnings, and working relationship with Judge Kofi. Her intuition, honed by years of police work, told her that behind the facade of a happy family life lay something much more complicated and dangerous. The Norwalk District Attorney's Office greeted Detective Zana Imara with the usual hustle and bustle of a workday. Secretaries typed documents, lawyers hurried through the corridors with briefcases full of papers, and muffled voices discussing other people's fates could be heard coming from the offices. But today, there was a tension in the air. The news of Jabari Kiambu's death had already spread throughout the office. Zana headed for the reception area of the district attorney's office, where a middle-aged woman with neatly styled hair and a stern expression sat behind a massive desk. The nameplate on the desk read, Marilyn Carter, Assistant District Attorney. Good afternoon, Detective Imara, Norwalk Police Department. I need to speak with Mr. Harris about Jabari Kiambu. The secretary looked up from her computer, and a flash of sympathy crossed her eyes. Of course, Detective. Mr. Harris is expecting you. It's a terrible tragedy. Jabari was one of our best prosecutors. District Attorney Robert Harris was a heavy-set man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. His office was furnished in a traditional style, dark wood, leather furniture, diplomas, and awards on the walls. He had seen a lot in his years in the justice system, but the death of a colleague had clearly shaken him. Detective, please sit down. I can't believe Jabari is gone. Just yesterday we were discussing a difficult case, and today... Harris sighed heavily. What can you tell me about the cause of death? Preliminary reports indicate poisoning. The investigation is just getting started, but I need information about Mr. Kiambu's work, his recent cases, and his colleagues. Jabari was an exemplary prosecutor, principled, honest, with excellent results. 3 months ago, I appointed him lead prosecutor for high-profile cases, a great responsibility and recognition of his professionalism. Zana opened her notebook. Tell me more about the promotion. How much did his salary change? Harris paused for a moment before answering. Well, his salary increased significantly. The new position comes with bonuses for the complexity of the cases and for working with special categories of crimes. Overall, the increase was about 70%. What about additional income? I know that Mr. Kiambu received money for consulting services. Yes, that's permissible under certain rules. Jabari advised a private law firm on corporate law. Everything was agreed with me and the ethics committee. What firm did he advise? Harris hesitated again. To be honest, I don't remember the exact name. The documents should be in the personnel department. But it was a small firm that specializes in corporate disputes. Zana felt that the prosecutor was not telling the whole truth. An experienced manager could not fail to remember who his subordinate was advising, especially when such significant sums were involved. Mr. Harris, which judges did Mr. Kiambu work with most closely? Mainly Judge Amari Kofi. They had several big cases: organized crime, drug trafficking, financial fraud. Judge Kofi has a lot of experience in these matters. How would you describe their working relationship? Professional, effective. Both are serious professionals, and the results of their joint work have always been excellent. Zana wrote down the judge's name, underlining it twice. Did Mr. Kiambu have any conflicts with any of his colleagues or defendants? Any threats? No, nothing like that. Jabari was good at getting along with people. Of course, criminals didn't like him, but that's normal for a prosecutor. And recently, has anything changed in his behavior? Harris thought for a moment. Perhaps he became more focused. He talked less with his colleagues and spent more time in his office. But I attributed that to the responsibilities of his new position. Zana thanked the prosecutor and asked him to show her to Jabari's office. The room was typical of a government office: functional furniture, shelves with legal reference books, a few personal photos on the desk. But upon closer inspection, the details spoke volumes. Jabari's computer was password protected, but technicians were already working on hacking it. There were documents from several cases on the desk, but one caught Zana's attention. It was the case of Kwame Asante, a 39-year-old man accused of a series of rapes in the Norwalk area. There were many documents in the folder, but a note written in Jabari's hand was particularly interesting. Review the evidence. Possible procedural violations. Zana carefully studied the case file. Asante was accused of assaulting 4 women over a 2-year period. The evidence seemed conclusive: victim statements, DNA analysis, witnesses. But the file contained a court decision to release the defendant due to violations in the collection of evidence. Interesting case, the detective muttered as she photographed the documents. In a desk drawer, she found an even more intriguing discovery: a notebook with phone numbers and brief notes. Most of the entries were ordinary, contacts for colleagues, lawyers, witnesses, but several numbers were accompanied by strange notes: AK, evening, meeting, usual place, money received. The most mysterious item was a letter hidden under a stack of documents. It was handwritten on expensive paper with no title or signature. "Jay, I can't do this anymore. Every day I'm afraid that everything will come out. What we're doing is destroying everything I believed in. But we can't stop now. Let's meet today at 8 to discuss the next steps. Destroy this letter. A." Zana carefully photographed the letter and continued her search. The computer, whose password the technicians had already cracked, contained even more compromising material. In a folder innocuously named Archive was encrypted correspondence between Jabari and someone who signed as partner. The messages were cautious, but their meaning gradually became clear. Partner. Case number 423 requires special attention. The client is willing to pay for a positive outcome. J. Understood. But the amount has to be substantial. The risk is high. Partner, 50,000, okay? J. Agreed. Let's meet tomorrow for the transfer. The dates of the correspondence were from last month, just around the time Asante's case was being heard. Zana felt the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place, forming a frightening picture. The next step was to visit Judge Amari Kofi. His office was located in the courthouse, a stately red brick building with white columns. The judge received the detective in his office, a spacious room with high ceilings and portraits of prominent lawyers on the walls. Amari Kofi was a distinguished-looking man of 48, with graying temples and piercing eyes. He wore an expensive suit and a Swiss watch, indicating his affluence. When Zana appeared, the judge looked visibly tense. "Detective, please sit down. I have terrible news about Jabari. We worked together on many important cases. Your Honor, I need to ask you a few questions about your working relationship with Prosecutor Kiambu. Of course, anything you need for the investigation. How often did you communicate outside the courtroom?" The judge hesitated for a moment. "Quite regularly. Complex cases require additional consultation and study of precedents. We met in my office or in a cafe near the courthouse." "What about the Kwame Asante case? Do you remember the details?" Kofi's face changed noticeably. "Yes, a difficult case. Serious charges, but during the trial, significant procedural violations were discovered in the collection of evidence. The defendant had to be released." "What kind of violations?" "Illegal search, testimony obtained under duress, problems with the chain of custody of physical evidence. The grounds for release were substantial." Zana took out her phone and showed the judge a photo of the letter found in Jabari's office. "Your Honor, this letter is signed with the letter A. The handwriting looks familiar to me." Kofi paled when he saw the photo. He was silent for a few seconds, then sighed heavily. "Detective, I think I need a lawyer." "You have the right to a lawyer, but we're just talking for now. I'm not accusing anyone of anything." "This letter, yes, I wrote it." "Then explain its contents." Kofi stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the city below. "Jabari and I, we had a relationship, not just a professional one." "A romantic relationship?" "Yes, for over a year. We are both married people and understood the complexity of the situation, but our feelings proved stronger than our minds." Zana wrote down every word. "And what is the letter about? What can't you keep quiet about anymore?" The judge turned to her, his eyes filled with despair and shame. "We did something we should never have done. We sold justice." "Explain." "Some cases. We made decisions based on money, not the law. Jabari received offers from lawyers, sometimes from the defendants themselves. If the amount was sufficient, he found ways to sabotage the prosecution, and I handed down acquittals." "How long did this go on?" "About 6 months. It started gradually, first one case, then another. The money was very large and the risk seemed minimal. But over time, I realized we had gone too far." "And the Asante case was one of those?" Kofi nodded. "Yes, $50,000 for his release. Jabari presented evidence of procedural violations that were actually fabricated. I was forced to release Asante, even though I knew he was guilty." "Who paid the money?" "Asante's lawyer contacted Jabari through intermediaries. The money was handed over in cash through third parties. We tried not to leave any traces." Zana felt the case taking a completely new turn. "Your Honor, when was the last time you saw Jabari?" "Last night. We met at our usual place, the Old Town Cafe on the outskirts of town. Jabari was very agitated and said he wanted to end our business relationship." "And your romantic relationship?" "Those too. He said he couldn't live in constant fear of being exposed. He wanted to go back to honest work and try to repair his relationship with his wife." "How did you react?" I understood how he felt. I felt the same way, but it was scary. If our schemes were exposed, we would both lose not only our careers, but also our freedom. "Did you threaten him?" "No, of course not. I love Jabari despite all our problems. I would never have hurt him." Zana studied the judge's face, trying to figure out if he was telling the truth. "Who else knew about your relationship and the corruption scheme?" "No one. As far as I know. We were very careful." "But someone had to connect you to the clients, didn't they?" Kofi thought for a moment. "There were middlemen, but Jabari never mentioned their names. He said it was safer for everyone that way." "Where were you this morning between 6 and 8 o'clock?" "At home with my wife. We had breakfast together as usual." Zana wrote down the information and stood up. "Your Honor, do not leave town without notifying us. The investigation is ongoing." As she left the courthouse, the detective pondered the information she had received. The picture was becoming clearer and at the same time more complicated. Jabari Kiambu led a double life. He was not only a corrupt prosecutor, but also a homosexual who was cheating on his wife with an influential judge. Their criminal activities had led to the release of a dangerous criminal. But who knew enough to want to kill Jabari? Other participants in the corruption scheme? One of Asante's victims? Or his wife, who accidentally found out about her husband's double life? Zana got into her car and took out her phone to call for backup to arrest Judge Kofi. But first, she needed to find Kwame Asante and find out what he had been doing in recent days, and whether his story was somehow connected to the murder of the man who had helped him avoid prison. Finding Kwame Asante turned out to be easier than Detective Zana Imara had expected. Freed thanks to the machinations of Jabari and Judge Kofi, the man was living in a rented apartment in the troubled Norwalk neighborhood, where the police regularly patrolled the streets. Asante was not hiding. Apparently, he was confident of his impunity. The apartment was on the second floor of an old multi-story building with peeling paint and creaky stairs. Zana went upstairs accompanied by 2 patrol officers, ready for anything. The door to apartment number 12 was ajar, and the sound of a television could be heard coming from inside. "Kwame Asante?" the detective called, knocking on the door. "Who's there?" a rough male voice replied. "Norwalk Police. We need to ask you some questions." The door opened, and a tall man in his late 30s appeared in the doorway, muscular and with a scar on his left cheek. His eyes were wary, but not frightened, the behavior of a man accustomed to dealing with law enforcement. "What do you want? I'm a free man. The court cleared me." "Mr. Asante, we're talking about the death of prosecutor Jabari Kiambu. We need to know where you were last night and this morning." Asante smiled, but there was no joy in his smile. "Kiambu is dead? Interesting. I thought he was untouchable." "Answer the question." "I was at home all day yesterday watching TV. My neighbors can confirm that. My TV is loud and they always complain. I didn't go anywhere this morning either." Zana studied his reaction closely. Asante didn't seem surprised by the prosecutor's death, but he didn't show any obvious satisfaction either. Did you know Prosecutor Kiambu personally? Only through the case. He wanted to put me in prison for something I didn't do. It's good that there were honest people who understood the situation. Honest people? Judge Kofi. He saw that the evidence against me was fabricated, that the police had violated my rights. Justice prevailed. Zana realized that Asante either really didn't know about the corruption scheme or was playing the role of an innocent victim of the system very well. Do you remember the names of the women who accused you of rape? Of course I do. They lied. They tried to ruin my life, but the truth always comes out. One of them was named Kamara Abeni. Does that name mean anything to you? Asante thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, I don't remember her. Why do you ask? The detective didn't answer his question, but she noted to herself that Asante either really didn't remember all of his victims or was hiding the truth. Having obtained the necessary testimony and checked his alibi with his neighbors, Zana left the apartment with the feeling that this man was not involved in Jabari's murder. The next step was to check Asante's list of victims. In the police archives, the detective found a folder with case files and carefully studied the statements of the women who had been attacked. 4 victims, 4 lives destroyed, and among them, Kamara Abini, 34 years old, married, works as a manager at an advertising agency. Zana read aloud. Assaulted on October 5, 2020 near her office. The detective felt all the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fall into place. Kamara was one of Asante's victims. Her husband had helped free the man who raped his wife, and the worst part was that Jabari probably didn't know about it. Zana hurried back to the house on Devancy Street. Kamara was still there, receiving condolences from relatives and friends. The detective asked her to step out onto the terrace for a private conversation. Mrs. Kiambu, I need to ask you a very important question. On October 5, 2020, you filed a report with the police about a sexual assault. Kamara's face changed instantly. The mask of a grieving widow slipped away, revealing an expression of horror and despair. How do you know? The attacker's name was Kwame Asante. He was recently released by the court thanks to your husband's work. Kamara slowly sank into a garden chair, covering her face with her hands. I thought no one would ever connect the dots. Tell me the truth, Kamara. The whole truth. The woman was silent for a long time, then looked up. There was no pretense in her eyes, only pain and exhaustion. That day changed my whole life. I was walking from my car to the office. It was almost dark. He attacked me from behind and dragged me into an alley. I tried to fight back, to scream, but did you tell your husband? No, I couldn't. Jabari was so principled, honest. He would have wanted me to fight for justice, go to court, testify, but I just wanted to forget, to move on. So I filed a report, but when it came to court, I refused to testify. But Asante was tried anyway. Yes, other women were stronger than me. They fought. I was a coward. Zana sat down next to her. Kamara, tell me how you found out about your husband's connection to this case. It was a nightmare. Kamara began to speak more quietly, as if afraid of being heard. A month ago, Jabari came home very late and very drunk. He almost never drank. He said something about money, about how we would be able to live better now. I helped him to bed and he kept muttering about some deal that had brought us $50,000. And what did you do? Nothing at first. I thought he'd gotten a raise or a bonus. But then I noticed that Jabari was acting strangely. He was nervous, secretive, often talking on the phone, going into another room. And those evening meetings. Did you follow him? Kamara nodded without looking up. I followed him once. I saw him meeting Judge Kofi at a cafe on the outskirts of town. They were sitting very close together, holding hands. I realized my husband was having an affair. How did you react? At first, I was in shock, then anger, pain, a feeling of betrayal, but I decided to find out more before doing anything. And what did you discover? I started looking into the cases Jabari was working on. I hacked into his computer while he was in the shower. I found correspondence with someone who signed as partner. At first, I didn't understand what it was about, but then the pattern became clear. They were taking money for acquittals. Zana listened intently, writing down every word. And then you saw the Asante case. Yes, Kamara's voice was almost a whisper. When I saw his name, his photo in the case file, My whole world turned upside down. The man who raped me had been set free by my husband for money. Did Jabari know you were one of his victims? No, I never told him about the attack. My maiden name was Abani in the case files. Jabari couldn't connect me to that woman. How did you feel when you realized that? Kamara stood up and walked over to the terrace railing, looking out at the quiet street. Imagine that the person you trust most in the world frees the monster who destroyed your life, and does it for money. All my ideas about justice, honesty, love, everything collapsed in an instant. And you decided to kill him. Not right away. At first, I just wanted to leave, file for divorce, start a new life. But then, I thought about the other women Asante could rape while he was free, about how many more criminals Jabari and Judge Kofi would release for money. Tell me how it happened. Kamara returned to the chair and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. I planned it for a long time. I studied information about poisoning and ways to obtain poisons. I settled on cyanide. It acts quickly and is difficult to detect immediately. Where did you get it? You can find anything on the internet if you know where to look. I ordered a silver cleaning agent that contains sodium cyanide. It took some time to isolate the pure substance. And how did you mix it into the coffee? Jabari always made his own coffee, but he had a habit of taking a shower while it was brewing. I got up earlier than usual that morning, waited for him to turn on the coffee maker, and added the poison to his mug. Just a few crystals. And then you went to yoga to establish an alibi. Yes, I knew it would take about 20 to 30 minutes after he drank the coffee for it to take effect. I wanted to be away from home when it happened. Zana closed her notebook and stood up. Kamara Kiambu, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. Kamara didn't resist as the detective read her rights. She even seemed relieved that the truth was finally out. Detective, she said as the handcuffs were being placed on her, I don't regret what I did. Jabari betrayed everything we believed in. He set free a monster who ruined my life. Isn't that justice? Justice is the work of the courts, not vigilante justice, Zana replied. The courts? Kamara laughed bitterly. Like Judge Kofi, who sells verdicts for money. Zana didn't answer. Deep down, she understood this woman's pain and despair, but the law was the law. Murder could not be justified, no matter what the motives. A few hours after Kamara's arrest, Judge Amari Kofi was also arrested. His confession of corruption led to the review of dozens of cases that may have been decided unjustly. Kwame Asante was brought to trial again, this time a fair one, and received the maximum sentence for his series of rapes. At the police station, Zana was filling out the final documents on the case when Captain Johnson approached her. Not an easy case, he said, looking over the report. Yes, all of the participants were both victims and perpetrators. Jabari betrayed his profession and released a rapist. Kamara killed her own husband. Judge Kofi sold justice. And Asante? He's the only one who got what he deserved, justice. Too late, though. The captain nodded. It's just a shame that one tragedy led to another. If Kamara had told her husband about the attack from the start, maybe nothing would have changed, Zana replied. Jabari was already involved in a corruption scheme. He would have found a way to justify his actions. The detective stood up and headed for the exit. The case was closed, but a bitter taste remained. There were no winners in this story, only victims of a system that allowed evil to flourish, and people who tried to restore justice by the wrong means. As she left the station, Zana thought about how many more cases like this were hidden behind a facade of respectability. How many prosecutors and judges sold their honor for money, and how many victims of injustice were willing to take the law into their own hands. Norwalk seemed like a quiet, peaceful town where people lived a comfortable, middle-class life. But beneath the surface, passions were running high, intrigues were being hatched, and a cruel justice was being meted out. The case of Jabari Kiambu was a reminder that evil can hide behind the most respectable masks, and that the thirst for justice can lead to the most desperate acts.